talk about the biological basis for matriarchy. At the risk of being labeled essentialist, which I happily affirm, I want to cut through the elegantly detached assumptions of gender studies and postmodernism and get back to an understanding of humans as living beings in an ecosystem with all the other sentient life that shares this planet. I love the mystery of the living earth and knowing that the soil is teeming with organisms without whose cooperation we couldn't even exist, and that our bodies are similarly composed, inside and out, of these same microorganisms engaged just as we are in their endlessly complex processes of birth, death, and regeneration. We are each part of a great, inexplicable energy, continuously moving in and out through forms, eventually causing the forms to change over time in a movement we have come to call evolution. As my pagan friend Charlie Murphy expresses it in a song he wrote decades ago, it's the blood of the ancients that runs through our veins, and the forms pass, but the circle of life remains. It's this circular or cyclical understanding that seems to most powerfully characterize the worldview of ancient matriarchal cultures, such as those unearthed and described in detail by the late Lithuanian-born archaeologist Maria Gimbutas. The field of matriarchal studies has been enormously hampered by the false idea that mother-based societies, having developed so early in human cultural evolution, were therefore inferior to and inevitably replaced by patriarchal ones. This simplistic Euro-Western ideal of progress blunts the ability of most people to see things as they are and has been used for naming things wrongly throughout world history. His story. I need to change this just a little bit so I can see my paper and still. Can you still hear me? Okay. In today's very much man-made world of frightening climate change and melting polar ice caps, massive deforestation, desertification, and defilement of Mother Earth, enslavement and trafficking of women and children, overpopulation, famine, endless wars, unnatural epidemics, and drug-resistant superbugs, it simply makes no sense to hold to a linear view of evolution. The idea that we modern or postmodern humans might be the pinnacle of nature's achievement so far is just ludicrous, and I think those of us gathered together in this room can probably agree about that. What I would like to do here tonight is to unpack some cutting-edge scientific developments emerging in recent years and place them in context that goes as far back as our human beginnings and probably earlier. Besides looking again at Maria Gimbutas, I'll be focusing in particular on the revolutionary work of a woman scientist named Dr. Shelley E. Taylor, whose 2002 book, The Tending Instinct: Women, Men, and the Biology of Our Relationships, goes a long way toward corroborating the intuitions and felt understandings articulated by goddess scholars and pagans in the last 30 years. Dr. Taylor is the American scientist who decided to investigate the so-called fight or flight response. Until Dr. Taylor's work, all humans were presumed in an emergency or under stress to instinctually attack or else flee the dangerous situation. Taylor called into question the gender bias inherent in scientific research up to that point, under which only male rats had been tested in the laboratory and only men in human studies. Suspecting that women's responses might differ, she and her women graduate students proved it in their groundbreaking Tend and Befriend studies they performed in the late 1990s. You probably have seen Tend and Befriend, right? To seriously oversimplify their results, men under stress generate testosterone, which activates the fight or flight response, while women, in the same circumstances, generate oxytocin, the hormone present during labor and breastfeeding. which among other things has been shown to have a calming effect. Taylor writes that oxytocin, quote, leads mothers to tend to their offspring. And her studies showed that women in the face of danger bonded together with other women and gathered in the children. Thus the name Tend and Befriend. But the studies opened up much more complex functions of hormones, and Taylor's research has radical feminist implications. Although the final conclusions on the Tend and Befriend studies, as reported by the mainstream media, were fairly banal, basically saying women need female friends, in my opinion, the studies showed undeniably why women need to govern society. In my work in the Women's Spirituality Master's Program at ITP in Palo Alto, I teach a course called Archaeomythology, which is the name given by Maria Gimbutas to the interdisciplinary theoretical model and methodology she invented in the late 20th century to investigate the female-centered civilizations she discovered in the strata below those of the later patriarchal cultures. So you have to think archaeologically. Although she purposefully avoided using the term matriarchy at the time, believing it to suggest female dominance rather than the egalitarianism she was actually seeing, her work stands as a powerful support to current matriarchal studies. We know now from living people who define themselves as matriarchal that this structure always denotes, among other things, egalitarianism. To make sense of what she was unearthing in the civilizations of old Europe, Europe before the patriarchal Indo-Europeans came, Gimbutas used linguistics, mythology, folklore, folk art, folk songs, and other ethnographic techniques alongside her specialized expertise in the hard science of archaeology. Having been born into a socialist intellectual household in Vilnius, where both of her parents worked as doctors, she was exposed to local folk culture by the peasants hired by her parents to care for her. And having grown up at a time when Lithuanian activists were reclaiming the ancient folk heritage as part of a revolutionary strategy, she herself, as an adolescent, collected over 1,000 Lithuanian folk songs. As a young married woman, she had to flee from Europe with a baby under one arm and a dissertation under the other, arriving at Harvard and later at UCLA, an already renowned archaeologist. It was then that she began to bring her indigenous interdisciplinary lens to bear on the ancient material she was finding in her digs that simply did not match the weapons and male dominance so familiar from the later periods. The interdisciplinary methodology she used allowed her to include, or perhaps start from, her felt sense of the material. She single-handedly brought prehistory out of the darkness and into the light as she clarified the more than 100,000 female figurines and other artifacts that had seemed unimportant to the male archaeologists prior to her work. What we call permaculture today, for example, and we believe to be an innovative modern approach to sustainable agriculture. Gimbutas showed us our Neolithic ancestors had invented and had practiced successfully for thousands of years. When I teach archaeomythology, I try to first of all help my students to understand that there's an underlying structure in nature that supports and holds us all in place. All the people, plants, animals, stars, and planets. And that this structure is the same one that has always existed for life on this planet, even though, at this point in history, we are tampering with it at our own expense, Western science having declared nature to be inanimate and humans to be in charge of it. The recent NASA bombings of the moon, do you know about that? Are a perfect example of this problem.